Hey folks, I'm going to see if I can do a really fast version of this one. 10 things that sucked about the 90s. Number one, boredom. We were very bored. There was a lot of empty space. We were lining up to go into class, lining up to come out of class, waiting around at the DMV, waiting around to do this, waiting around to do that. There was a lot of waiting around and a lot of downtime, a lot of boredom. You go home and there'd be nothing to do at home besides your homework, so that meant that there was nothing to do. Number two, commercials. Imagine the worst ads on YouTube that you've seen. At least you can click away from those. Imagine not being able to click through them. 1/3 of all TV time was taken up by commercials. 30-minute time slot for The Simpsons. 20 minutes of it was The Simpsons. 10 minutes of it was commercials. And you couldn't skip them unless you were going to videotape them and watch later and kind of fast forward them. Or until things like TiVo came out, you watched all the commercials. It was your chance to maybe go get a soda, walk away for a minute, but commercials sucked. Number three, if it wasn't in the store, it didn't exist. We didn't have the internet to find obscure items or high quality items. So I know as a musician, I couldn't find good amps in Fresno, California with like 1 million people in it until Guitar Center opened up. Just no one sold them. So if they didn't sell them, they didn't exist. There were certain things that you just couldn't get. If you went to Circuit City, the cameras that they had, those are the cameras you could buy and no others. If you went to Toys R Us, the games that they had, those are the games you could buy, no others. Special ordering stuff was almost unheard of for a lot of products. And if you were looking for a specialty product, you usually didn't think about it, or you'd have to know about it through some other source. You'd have to know about some obscure book that you could special order. Otherwise, it wasn't there. There wasn't the internet to find all of these things, and a lot of them were honestly poor quality. Number four, slow internet. We had dial-up internet, 56K modems were fast modems. That meant most of the internet was text, and if you wanted to look at a picture, it was like, it took so long, and forget about video. So the slow internet made the internet a lot less usable, but you had to be a lot more intentional about using it. Maybe that was a good thing, but the main thing is that the internet was a slow experience. So you wanted to make use of as much of it as you could. Number five, cars broke down a lot. This is a thing that I think a lot of people forget. We were driving a lot of cars from the 80s still in the 90s, and they broke down a lot. They were not made at the same quality standards as towards the late 90s and the early 2000s. Of course, I drive a car from like 2005. It's never really broken down on me. I've had like a battery die and that's it. But cars would break down. Let me just share an anecdote. I had an 86 Caprice Classic. This car instead of having serpentine belt, it had all these fan belts. They would squeal. You'd have to open it up, get a wrench, like tighten the alternator. But if you tightened it too much, you'd slam your brakes at a light and the engine would die. You'd have to hopefully start your engine back up, pull into the parking lot, loosen it up again, and start squealing again. That was life owning a car. I would drive around with my friends. Their cars would die. It was just a thing that happened a lot. Cars were just not as good as they are today. They were not as well made. Yes, cars are very much too expensive, and you could actually have the option of buying a cheap car that might break down on you in the 90s. And that was cool. However, the cars did break down a lot. We got to remember that. I think we forget that cars were just not as reliable back then as they are today. Number six, movie rentals. Now, I have a lot of nostalgia for going to the movie store and picking out a movie, but how that fit into your life was actually pretty inconvenient, but we did it because we loved movies and movies were great. So you'd have to go to the store, wander around the store, pick a movie out, go home, watch the movie, rewind the movie because it was on a videotape, and remember to go back the next day to drop it off and do the same thing again. That just took a lot of time, right? It just took a lot of time. Same thing with game rentals. And if you wanted a particular game, you would have to really hope that somebody was going to bring that game back that had it rented out. Maybe you'd never get to try that game because Joe Blow over there would always be renting it first thing on Friday morning so that you could never get there and get the game. Best night was to get there on Tuesday night. You had a good chance of getting the game that you wanted to get. Number seven, games were expensive. Games were $80, $85, sometimes $90. I remember Super Mario RPG was like $89.99, just way out of my price range. In today's money, that'd be like a game being like $170. People would just be throwing a fit. So while we're complaining about $80 games, $80 in the 90s was a lot of money. Now, you could rent the games, but if you stop and think about it, you were paying $5 or $6 for a rental. Yes, that's a lot less than $85, and that lets you know whether you want to pay $85 for that game. However, think about Steam sales. You ever buy a game for $10? You can buy AAA games for $10 on a Steam sale. That's way better than renting it. Even if the game isn't very good, you get a lot more value out of your money than you got renting games in the 1990s. That's just the way that things are. Like, games were really expensive. Neo Geo cartridges were over $100. Number 8, music sucked and was expensive. So the price of CDs started skyrocketing at the end of the 90s. Sometimes it was up to $20. That's like paying $35 in today's money for an album. Absolutely unheard of for most things, especially with a CD pressing. But that's the way it was. And music also sucked. Once you get to 1997 and you have all the radio stations get bought out by Clear Channel, everything gets leveled. You hear the same 5 bad songs every hour. Just music sucked. And you would get this thing where you'd pay $20, buy a CD, get home, listen to it. You hear the single that you liked off the radio, and the other 13 songs on the album would just be complete trash. And there was nothing for it. You couldn't return the album. You know, they couldn't sell an unopened or an opened album. So you just had to eat the $20. And this also happened where you couldn't listen to the albums anymore. In record stores of yore, like 80s and before, you could put the record on a record player and listen to it. People would just go to the record store to listen to records if they wanted to. But you couldn't do that in the 90s because they couldn't sell an opened CD. So no, you didn't get to listen to the CDs. There were no listening stations at Best Buy or Circuit City or wherever. So you just bought the CD and you rolled the dice, and most of the time it was bad. This is why everybody was excited about Napster. It was free. People were excited to just steal music and have it be free, but they were also excited because they had been burned so many times by $20 CDs and just really bad songs on the radio. You couldn't get obscure music after the mid 90s. It just wasn't around. You had to already know about it and maybe special order it for like $25, which was unreal. So you just didn't get to find out about a lot of bands unless you were reading a magazine like Metal Maniacs or something. You never heard Motorhead on the radio, and you never saw their records in the stores. You had to go out of your way to try to buy the records. But they were free on Napster. So when Napster came around, you also got to listen to music that just you otherwise were never allowed to listen to, and it was free. So all of that primed the pump for Napster and the revolution that ended up cratering the music industry in the early 2000s. But yeah, music sucked and it was really expensive. Number 9, bad health, beliefs and lifestyles. So in the 90s, everyone thought that fat was really bad for you. So they took the fat out of all the food and loaded it up with sugar. They even had a Seinfeld joke about this, right? You know, the Snackwell cookies, they take the fat out, but they just add a lot. It's just eating sugar. So fat was bad. Everybody thought that you were going to get thin by not eating fat, and everyone got really fat as a result. You had these 4 food groups where it was just a shopping list put out by the USDA. You got to make sure you buy your milk. If you don't eat your milk, your bones will shatter. And that's how it was. That's what it was like. You know, that's what it was like back then. You ate garbage. I remember the food pyramid came out, the diabetes food pyramid, with 6 to 11 servings of grain. If you're eating 11 slices of bread per day, you're going to get fat. You're not going to have room for anything else. 11 slices of carbohydrates. Wow. But that's the way they built it. And then you should have 2 servings of meat. Now, you didn't know anyone who knew anything about nutrition in the 90s because the schools just taught the USDA approved curriculum, the food pyramid of Diabetesville. Luckily, most of the kids, we weren't fat because we were still really active in the 90s because we were really bored. We'd go play a lot of basketball and football because there was no internet and there was nothing to do. So we stayed in reasonably good health, but it's really easy to see how the health just cratered in the 2000s because nobody knew how to eat. Nobody knew how to count calories. Nobody knew how to diet. So everybody just got fat and everybody had the wrong ideas about what things were healthy for you or not healthy for you. People thought that like meat was bad for you. Like it was just really bad in the 90s as far as that. And you couldn't find a gym. So there were very few gyms unless you were into like bodybuilding lifestyle. There just weren't that many gyms. Gyms started to open up in the late 90s and they were expensive. I remember we couldn't use the weight room at my high school unless you were like, you know, the football coach would take us in there to like lift weights or the track coach or whatever. But like you couldn't just go and lift weights. You couldn't just go and be healthy as a student. That wasn't allowed. So your opportunities for exercise were a lot more limited in the 90s as well. And a lot of people just didn't know how to work out, didn't know how to do any of that stuff. We weren't taught anything in PE that could have served us to be healthy. Even as children and later as adults, we just learned nothing in PE. PE was just a complete waste of time. That's the fact. You're going to run the mile today. Well, that did keep us healthy. It did keep us active, but we didn't learn about how to eat or exercise or anything like that. It was really bad back then. So number 10, cable TV. Cable TV was the worst value in the history of the world. I as a teenager, I convinced my dad to turn off our cable TV because I thought it was such a value, and he did it. He's like, it's a bad value. I agree. I don't really like the shows. I told him, like, all the good shows are on broadcast TV, which is free. Right? Seinfeld is on NBC and The Simpsons is on Fox. Like, all the shows that we like to watch in the evening, because that's the only time we're home, are free. So why are we paying for these bad cable TV shows, so we can watch like edited versions of Conan the Barbarian on Saturday? No, pocket the money and just buy a copy of Conan the Barbarian. And so once we canceled the cable, that also got me to get away from the most convenient form of entertainment. Like, cable TV was a 90s equivalent of doom scrolling, right? Where it's the lowest effort kind of entertainment. People would just flip through channels watching little bits of this and that out of boredom because everything was boring. So cable TV was the least effort way of doing that. And once I realized that it was just sucking my time, I would spend 30 minutes trying to find something to watch. I'm like, that's a waste of time. Let's turn that off. If I can't find something to watch, I'll play Genesis game or something, right? I'll play a computer game, or I'll practice guitar, and that's what I'm going to do. And I did that, and it I think it made a positive impact. Plus, on Saturdays and Sundays, my sister and I, we would watch movies. We would put VHSs in. We would know what movies we wanted to buy based on movies we rented, and we would buy them and we would watch them. So we really saved the money and spent it on something that was a lot better, which was watching movies. And yes, we would watch the same movies over and over again, but you develop a rapport with the movie where you start to understand how the storytellers told their story. And I think it's made me a better writer rather than watching a bunch of low effort cable TV bullshit from the 90s. That's my thought on it. So leaving your thoughts down below. Those are 10 things that actually stuck from the 90s. Yes, I am the writer of Afterglow Generation Y. This has a lot of nostalgia, and my generation is very afflicted by nostalgia. This is a bit of anti-nostalgia, just to remind us that, yeah, not everything was peachy keen in the 90s. There were a lot of things about the 90s that were great and better. And you can make a case that the video store is like better than streaming, but I don't really think so. And I think it comes with, a lot of inconveniences that disrupted your life, like having to always go to the video store to do things. That was just an inconvenient thing. And I think that's why a lot of people watch cable TV. It's like, I don't want to go to Blockbuster. I'm just going to flip through these channels and pay $50 a month for it. So, and just to hammer home the point of how bad a value cable TV actually was, right? I knew people that paid $100 a month for cable with like HBO and all that stuff. That would be like paying $200 maybe in today's money. So if you subscribe to every single streaming service, it still would not be the same as cable. And with cable, you had to still watch commercials. You still had to watch them. It was so much worse than it is today. So, yeah, those were some of the bad things about the 90s. Commercials. Oy. Leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to read them, and I will see you all next time. Have a great, great day.